Welcome, everyone. We're glad to have you here. I'll now turn it over to our moderator, ASH Executive Director, Laurent Hubert.
Thank you, Megan. Welcome to this virtual press conference held by the plaintiffs who just filed a new lawsuit against the U.S. Food and Drug Administration for its inaction on issuing a final rule banning menthol cigarettes. So the three plaintiffs, Action Smoking and Health, the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council, and the National Medical Association. My name is Laurent Hubert, and I will be the moderator for this session today. And there will be ample time for questions. But if you have questions, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and feel free to direct them to a specific panelist. So without any further ado, we'll get started with Dr. Valerie Yerger, who's a founding member of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. And she'll tell us why this filing is essential today. Valerie, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you, Laurent. Hi, I'm Dr. Valerie Yerger. Well, here we are again. I stand here with our co-plaintiffs, Action on Smoking and Health, and the National Medical Association, as we announce a new lawsuit against the U.S. Food and Drug Administration for their continued inaction regulating menthol cigarettes. Our new legal action comes nearly 3 years after we first sued the FDA for not taking action on its own recommendation, which was to remove menthol cigarettes from the marketplace to save lives. Our last lawsuit resulted in the FDA proposing a final rule to ban menthol cigarettes, but it has been sitting in the White House since June 2022, with the promise that a decision would come by August 2023, then by December 2023, and then by March 2024. But now March has come and gone. We already know that tobacco is a critical public health issue that remains the leading cause of preventable death and disease. But apparently, we need to keep beating the drum about how Black Americans in particular bear the greatest burden. And it doesn't even have to be that way. Despite significant reductions in overall smoking rates in the United States, smoking among poor, less educated, and marginalized groups remains high. Every year, 45,000 Black Americans prematurely and unnecessarily die from tobacco-caused diseases. An estimated 85% of them smoked menthol cigarettes. This disproportionate use of menthol cigarettes among Black Americans is not a coincidence. I was one of the first tobacco documents researchers out of UCSF who exposed the tobacco industry's systematic, predatory marketing schemes to dump highly concentrated menthol cigarette marketing into urban inner city areas. The tobacco industry's pervasive presence in these neighborhoods, along with its powerful corporate influences and building relationships with some Black organizations and their leaders, have contributed to the racialized geography of today's tobacco-related health disparities. Tobacco companies continue to rely heavily on their co-optation of community leaders to diffuse tobacco control efforts, a tactic that has proven to be beneficial only for the tobacco industry. When we look at the number of people who die every year from gun violence, accidents, suicides, and AIDS, and you add up all those numbers, you don't come near the number of people who die from tobacco-related diseases. And if you look at who is disproportionately carrying the burden, it's Black Americans. Between 1980 and 2018, menthol cigarettes were responsible for an extra 10 million new smokers and 378,000 premature deaths in the United States. Black Americans accounted for 41% of these premature deaths, even though we made up only 12% of the population. The disproportionate toll of menthol cigarettes among Black Americans compared to the general population is a social injustice. The evidence is clear. So what more is needed? At the very least, the evidence shows why none of us can remain silent and complicit as bystanders. Based on projections informed by research, The proposed FDA rule will lead to an additional 923,000 smokers quitting, including 230,000 Black smokers. And that's just in the first 13 to 17 months after it goes into effect. The FDA, President Biden, and his White House administration are also aware of the evidence. It is long past time for them to get inoculated against whatever the heck is keeping them from getting these deadly products out of the US marketplace. Remove menthol cigarettes from the marketplace and do it now. This 15-year delay in banning menthol cigarettes is costing lives, especially Black lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yerger. And indeed, this delay only benefits the tobacco industry, and it's an obstacle to the right to health of Americans and African Americans. Our next speaker, Chris Leung, attorney of Christopher Leung with Law PLLC, and will talk us through the lawsuit, so the filing. The floor is yours, Chris.
Thank you, Laurent. I don't know how I can follow Dr. Yerger and that passionate recitation of the call to action that she just issued towards the Biden administration and FDA. Our lawsuit is the continuation of our continuing fight to get menthol out of the marketplace. We thought it was particularly important here to bring this lawsuit given the delays caused by FDA. FDA knows what the solution is with respect to protecting public health. That FDA has known about that solution since 2011, when its own advisory committee issued a report detailing the many ways that tobacco companies preyed on youth, the African American community, and women. And since that time, the FDA has failed to act. Given the FDA's notice to propose rulemaking back in 2022, we wanted to give the FDA an opportunity to do the right thing, to issue the final rule. It set a deadline for itself, or a goal for itself, of August of last year and missed that goal. It set another goal for the end of 2023 and missed that goal as well. And then it set another goal for the end of March, which just happened 2 days ago, and it missed that goal as well. It's particularly disappointing given that FDA has an obligation under the Tobacco Control Act to protect the health of all Americans. The Biden administration has certainly emphasized the need for health equity into addressing the harms to particular members of society that are bearing the brunt of the tobacco companies' efforts. And so our lawsuit here is asking the court for help in compelling the FDA to issue a final rule consistent with the Tobacco Control Act and the Administrative Procedure Act. We've alleged a single claim identifying the FDA's undue delay in this particular area, and we are asking for a final rule to be issued by the FDA as soon as possible. I would be happy to take any questions at the end of this presentation, but that concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Chris. Our next speaker is Kelsey Romeo-Stuppy, managing attorney at ASH, and she will tell us why go over why this lawsuit matters, what's so important at this time. Kelsey, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Laurent. And I want to thank all of our partners here today. Ash is so pleased to be a part of this group. So I wanted to take a few minutes today to talk about why this rule is important. There are two major issues here. First is a public health issue, and second is a social justice issue. This is a public health issue because menthol cigarettes kill people. From 1980 through 2018, an estimated 10.1 million people started smoking in the United States because of menthol cigarettes, and an estimated almost 400,000 people died prematurely. The FDA itself estimates that a menthol rule alone could save almost 700,000 lives, including as many as 240,000 Black lives over the next 40 years. Approximately 40,000 Americans have died from menthol cigarettes since our first lawsuit was filed in 2020. That's just due to this delay. Approximately 116,000 people have started smoking due to menthol since our first lawsuit was filed in 2020. But this isn't just a public health issue, it's also a social justice issue. It's estimated that 40% of the people that die because of menthol cigarettes are African Americans. Again, the government acknowledges this. When the draft rule came out, HHS Secretary Becerra said the proposed rules represent an important step to advance health equity by significantly reducing tobacco-related disparities. The projected number of smokers who would quit after a U.S. menthol ban would be almost 800,000 daily smokers, which includes almost 200,000 African American smokers. A ban on menthol cigarettes would save 6,000 Black lives every year. This isn't a concept that's unique in the world. In fact, it's recognized largely as a best practice worldwide. Menthol cigarettes have been banned in many places, including Brazil, Canada, Ethiopia, Turkey, Moldova, the European Union, and the United Kingdom. And evidence from these bans shows the importance of a U.S. menthol ban. For example, the EU menthol ban was effective in reducing menthol use, and it increased quit attempts and quitting among pre-ban menthol smokers. In Canada, 21.5% of menthol smokers quit smoking after their menthol ban. Menthol smokers were more likely than non-menthol smokers to make a quit attempt and to actually quit. By failing to ban menthol, the U.S. government is failing to protect the right to health of its citizens. Action on Smoking and Health, with the support of AATCLC and 206 other public health groups, has highlighted this violation in front of an International Human Rights Committee, the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. So in addition to domestic courts, we're encouraging the international human rights community to take note and take action. When the FDA announced its commitment to a menthol ban, they issued a press release which stated, "This decision is based on clear science and evidence establishing the addictiveness and harm of these products. Public health policy supported by the facts, the law, and the American voters should not require 2 lawsuits from NGOs in order to pass a rule to save lives." Thank you.
Thank you, Kelsey, and for really reminding us that it's really a already recognized best practice to ban menthol tobacco products to protect the health of citizens all over the world. Our next speaker is Dr. Lawson, who's Yolanda Lawson, who's president of the National Medical Association, who will tell us why they joined the lawsuit. Dr. Lawson, the floor is yours.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for allowing me to speak today. As the collective voice of Black doctors and their patients, the National Medical Association stands united with our partners in calling for the FDA to finalize the rule to eliminate menthol cigarettes. We are the oldest and largest organization in the country representing Black physicians, and many of us have seen the devastating impact of tobacco use on our patients and their families for decades. Menthol cigarettes have had a devastating and disproportionate impact on the health of Black Americans. Smoking-related diseases are the #1 cause of death in the Black community, with approximately 45,000 deaths each year. And menthol cigarettes are a major reason why. We know that menthol cigarettes are a major public health issue. The menthol cigarettes can make it more difficult to quit smoking. We know they're damaging to the lungs. We know the FDA found menthol cigarettes pose health risk above what can be seen with non-menthol cigarettes. And lastly, we know that disparities in tobacco use and tobacco-related disease in Black people are increased. So it's unfathomable that another delay could occur that could potentially save up to over 250,000 lives or Black Americans. Each day, menthol cigarettes stay on the market. The tobacco industry can and will continue to target Black communities with these deadly products. Delaying action has serious consequences and leads to more Black lives lost related to smoking-related conditions. So again, I'm very happy that the NMA could join in this fight and join in the advocacy efforts to ban menthol. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lawson. And the next speaker is Joelle Lester with the Public Health Law Center, who give us a little bit of history on how we got into this lawsuit and a bit of the background. Joelle, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Laurent. It's a pleasure to be here with these public health and social justice leaders who are fighting for so many of us to push the final menthol cigarette ban over the finish line. I'm here as the #1 fan of the plaintiffs, and I know I speak for many public health organizations when I say we are grateful for their leadership and also wish it didn't come to this, where they would have to undertake the effort of filing a second lawsuit to get a final regulation in place that we know is supported by the science and the law and by justice. So I'm here because the Public Health Law Center filed the citizen petition in 2013, pushing the agency to act on menthol. And that petition is part of the basis for the lawsuit that these organizations are leading again today. When we filed that lawsuit in 2013, we thought action on menthol was already overdue because the agency had had 4 years to act to address the deadly harms and egregious health disparities caused by the tobacco industry with menthol cigarettes. And now we are 11 years later and we still don't have a rule. So much has happened on menthol before and after the FDA had the authority to regulate tobacco products. I'm not going to go through it all here, but we do have a timeline on our website if you're interested in diving into the minutia. But just trust me when I tell you there has been so much work, including several efforts to gather all of the science, really studying the impact of menthol in cigarettes on initiation, cessation, and the depth of addiction. The science is overwhelming and unanimous that menthol cigarettes are killing people and must be removed from the marketplace. The FDA has clear authority under the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act to take action now, and they must do so. And just to underscore the points made by all of these wonderful speakers here today, this is a justice issue. Menthol cigarettes hurt African Americans more than other people by design. The industry has targeted the Black community with these products, and the result has been addiction, illness, and death. And although the FDA delayed much longer than we wanted them to before this point, they have now done all the heavy lifting. They've gone through the entire notice and comment rulemaking process. They've refined the rule. They've done all the work, and they've delivered a final rule that could save lives today to the White House. And so I'm just grateful that you all have taken this step to push the White House to do what it must do. I would also note that unfortunately in America, it often takes litigation to advance civil rights and social justice causes. And so I'm grateful for the plaintiffs for being willing to carry that burden for us to get a menthol rule finalized. Thank you.
Thank you, Joelle. And our next speaker and last speaker is Carol McGruder, co-chair of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council, who will close this session with the speakers. Carol, the floor is yours.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. I'm Carol McGruder, and I'm one of the very, very proud co-chairs of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council, along with my other co-chair, Dr. Philip Gardner. I would just want to say a little bit about the AATCLC, and that we are a group of Californians. We've expanded now, but we were formed in 2008 to inform and direct the priorities for commercial tobacco control and prevention as they affect African Americans and African immigrants in this country. And just coincidentally, that next year was when President Barack Obama signed the Tobacco Control Act that we've already talked about. The exclusion of menthol in that initial signing was such an egregious act and such an act of leaving the African American community and African American children and adolescents out in the cold. There is no group in this country that loves a Black smoker more than the AATCLC does. That is why we exist, is to protect our people and their families and our communities from the consistent, pernicious, racist targeting that we have experienced and endured for the past 40 years. So we are back here today to file our new lawsuit against the FDA to compel them to protect the African Americans in our country. We've lost 1 million Black people in the past 20 years, 1 million people. And we stand with those people and their families, many of whom are related to me. So we're asking President Biden and the administration to protect us. We know that this final rule is not the end. It is the beginning of a long process to begin to repair the damage that has been done to our community, and that it needs to be accompanied by resources for all of the menthol smokers who have been targeted and who are really victims of the tobacco industry. I want to say that the final rule is not about the individual smoker. It is not about a brother standing on a corner and a policeman's going to come up and ask him if he's smoking a mentholated tobacco products, as we've heard from some of our detractors, many of whom receive tobacco industry funding. This is about the head of the snake. This is about the tobacco companies who have targeted us. This is about the manufacturers and the distributors. It is not about local people in the community. And that I want to also say that there are many African American organizations who have given this issue careful consideration. Among them is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, our oldest civil rights organization in this country. They passed the national resolution in 2016. Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated were one of the first national organizations to do this, and they have passed 2 resolutions to support these efforts, along with who are our co-plaintiffs, the National Medical Association. During COVID, we talked a lot about first responders in this country as our medical health care rose to the emergency that we faced as a nation. I want to talk a little bit about our last responders, our Black doctors who shepherd our people through the death and the disease and the death and the disease and the morbidity in our community, as they shepherd their patients through these illnesses, through dying with their families. And I want to commend that our NMA is standing with us, because they know better than anyone what lies at the end of the road for Black smokers. And so we want to prevent that. We say that not another generation of our children are going to be sucked in and addicted by these pernicious acts of the tobacco industry, along with the NAACP, the NMA, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, the NCNW, our National Coalition of Negro Women. We also have notables like Karen Bass, who is the mayor of the city of Los Angeles, one of our biggest cities in this country, who's a former chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, former Mayor Michael Coleman out of Columbus, Ohio, and many, many, many more stand on the right side of this issue. We want the FDA to get this done so that we can move on to the next steps, which is really getting into the work of saving our people and providing with the resources that they need to give up this addictive, now it's not a habit, it's an addiction, this addictive scourge on our community. And with that, I pass it back to our colleagues. And I'm just very proud to be on this call with all of you today.
Thank you very much, Carol. And so now we have ample time for questions and answers. So please feel free to type them in the Q&A section. The first one I'm going to go, the first question I have is, what is taking so long, and why the delay? Carol, you and I, we were like at the conference of the parties of an international treaty on tobacco, and the United States mentioned the action on menthol, but it's still taking so long. So Carol, maybe could you give us some words on this, and maybe Joelle also?
Sure, I would love to start us off. The delay is really the tobacco industry and the interference, the constant interference of them at every single level, starting with our own organizations and our own community and working its way up to the national levels of our government. This rule, actually, the FDA did try to have a rule that was redlined some years ago. And the industry knows that every year of delay is another year where they have the opportunity to addict another batch of our people. And the delay is directly related. And with the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, the tobacco industry should not be involved in any a part of this. So they're part of the TIPSAC, which is our scientific committee. They don't have a vote, but they're able to intervene and interfere and delay and to obfuscate all of the truth and the facts that we already know.
Joelle, could you have
Joelle?
anything to add to this?
Well, Carol's exactly right, of course. And I just would add that, you know, the original problem was when menthol cigarettes were left out of the protection in the Tobacco Control Act that prohibited other characterizing flavors in cigarettes. But they had enough science and evidence at that time. We've always known menthol is the most harmful of all of the characterizing flavors in cigarettes and other tobacco products. And so, you know, we need to look pretty far back to try to understand where the delays come from. And Carol's exactly right. It's industry interference. And also, I think the kind of wrong-headed approach of treating the tobacco industry like a legitimate stakeholder in the rulemaking process for commercial tobacco product regulation. They're not a legitimate stakeholder. They are totally willing to accept illness and death as the cost of doing their business, and they shouldn't be part of the process in any way. And when they are part of the process, they delay life-saving public health protections.
And thank you, Joelle. And Dr. Lawson, what would be what are the consequences of this delay? What is the cost, the human cost?
So the human cost, I think all of my colleagues here, I think each and every speaker alluded to the health risk, right? So that the human cost is health and even death. For me, this could be life or death. When you think about the impact and you think about just smoking as a whole and its impact on chronic disease, whether it be lung cancer, whether that be cardiovascular disease or purely lung disease. We know that approximately over 39,000 Americans have died from menthol cigarettes since our first lawsuit was filed in 2020. So this is ongoing and it demands immediate action.
Can I add something to that?
Go ahead, Valerie.
So, you know, as Dr. Lawson said, 39,000 folks have died since we filed our first lawsuit. That's 39,000 people who are sitting with us, having dinner, being with their families, who aren't going to be here in the next year. That kind of cost has to, I mean, you can't quantify that. And many of us are still dealing with the effects of COVID-19 pandemic. We've got intergenerational trauma that we're dealing with, and you add this on to what we're already experiencing in terms of the stress and how we're just trying to just get our basic needs met. This is for people to look at their daughters who are smoking and think, you're not going to be here next year, or to look at their parents and say, you're not going to be here next year because I know that you are using a product that's going to kill you. And this is causing some unnecessary additional trauma to us. And I just want to, they can still be living and still cause us a lot of grief and pain.
Next up, questions from were coming from the Q&A. Can you run through the specifics of the lawsuit? Is it just a refiling of the previous lawsuit, or are the new claims requests? And maybe you can also tie it and to clarify, you know, what would it achieve if successful? Who wants to get started with that? Who wants to give a first answer?
I could take that, Laurent.
Chris, go ahead.
So our first lawsuit filed in 2020 was slightly different. The specific request from that particular lawsuit was to get FDA to make a determination whether or not to add menthol to the list of banned characterizing flavors in combustible cigarettes. We knew that the science was all on our side with respect to, yes, in fact, menthol should have been banned years ago, back in 2009, 2011. But FDA had yet to make that sort of formal determination. Through the course of that litigation, FDA had sort of made an argument that it could make these sort of indefinite series of tentative decisions or preliminary decisions. But after a decision from our court, Magistrate Judge Candace Westmore, became clear that that sort of argument wouldn't fly, wouldn't carry any sort of weight. And so as a result, FDA committed to making a final determination with respect to, and I could cite the statute if necessary, but they decided to make that formal determination. They did that. And so by committing themselves to add menthol to the list of banned characterizing flavors, we called victory and we voluntarily dismissed our lawsuit. This lawsuit is asking for something slightly different. What we are asking today is basically having FDA issue its final rule, to promulgate and publish its final rule. And so now that FDA has determined that banning menthol from the marketplace would protect the public health, it now has an obligation to act on that. And so the Tobacco Control Act is clear. Once a notice has been issued, once the FDA has considered all the comments, once the FDA has closed the comment period and determined that such a rule would protect the public health, then the FDA has an obligation to publish and promulgate such a final rule. And so we've asked that in our complaint. And with respect to a timeline, I'll just point out, and I think Joelle may have touched on this earlier, is that in 2009, when all other flavors, such as cherry or strawberry, were being banned by the Tobacco Control Act, the tobacco companies and retailers and distributors were given 30 days, basically to clear their, 90 days to clear their shelves. That's it. We think that's a reasonable amount of time, more than enough time. And I think that our understanding is that tobacco cigarettes get stale in any case. And so, that would be more than enough time for retailers, distributors, and manufacturers to stop the sale and distribution of menthol cigarettes. With respect to what this lawsuit would achieve if successful, I think many of our speakers here touched on it, and I would just sort of echo again what they've sort of highlighted, which is be saving lives, would be improving the public health. We would be resolving the largest, greatest health disparities being borne by African Americans in the last decades or so, the predatory natures of the tactics by the tobacco companies. We would save youth from a lifetime of nicotine addiction, and we would save our country billions of dollars and save medical costs each year. And I hope that answers those questions there. I'd happy to have others jump in.
I'd like to just jump in and say that I really want people, especially Black people, to understand that we aren't naive enough to think that this rule is magic. It's not magic. And people say, do bans work? And I want to say, does racist, pernicious targeting work? Because it's been 40 years. So you're not going to pass a rule or any law and expect some magic to happen with even a few years. This is the beginning of a very important process, and that we aren't going anywhere, that we're here to shepherd this process. All of our national public health groups are on board. Cities, counties, states are on board to roll out the next phase of the process. And so it's not magic. We passed the Voting Rights Act 50, 60 years ago, and Black people, we're still fighting for our voting rights. And we will continue to do so. And we will continue to shepherd this process. So this is the beginning of a huge step forward. We want reparations for menthol smokers. That's something that we're talking about. We want resources, that our people are victims. And it's no better documented in Dr. Valerie Yerger's research, Smoking with the Enemy, Racialized Geography. Our people are victims. And so this is the beginning of the acknowledgement of that, and then the next steps of what we're going to be doing about it, which are numerous.
And banning menthol tobacco products, it's well-established best practice to protect health. So really something that needs to be done as soon as possible. And obviously there's a lot of research on the topic. And one of the questions is on how much does it cost the healthcare system as a whole? I know that there are even research or papers suggesting or quantifying even the environmental impact associated with the production of tobacco menthol products. But do any of you can speak on that, on the cost on the healthcare system or the economic cost of menthol products?
I can. So one very well published peer-reviewed journal article suggested that the cost of menthol cigarettes in the US are approximately $1,836 in healthcare costs per person. which is 1.62 billion among all adult smokers. So all of that could be saved over a 20-year period with the implementation of a menthol ban policy. So obviously it's a good financial decision as well.
If I may, let me, Laurent, give another side of that. I think that's really the impact side. When you stop and step back and ask, why are we even having this discussion? Why is menthol so important? I think the punchline is this. I did the research in 2018. I'm sure it's even gotten worse since then. If you took it all together, the United States tobacco industry is somewhere in the neighborhood of a $221 billion industry. Of that, menthol cigarettes represent somewhere in the neighborhood between 35 and 36% of it. What you're talking about and what the tobacco industry and why there's, and I appreciate Carol's comments, why they're fighting so vigorously, they should be the ones targeted, is that if you took menthol cigarettes off the market, you would be taking $21 billion off the market. This is something that they couldn't stand. We're actually making a stab into actually changing the lives of people. So I really want to underscore the idea that they're really only about profits. They're really only about money. They don't care a damn about Black lives. I want to thank my associates here for actually standing up for that. But that's all the tobacco industry is about. It's about the Benjamins.
Then if some of you could comment on the changes that have been made or have happened in places that have implemented bans in tobacco products. And so here it mentions, like in California and Sacramento, but other jurisdictions have done it, like the European Union has banned it. So as Kelsey, you mentioned a number of countries and jurisdictions around the world, because it is well-established best practice to protect health. So what can you say on this, on the effectiveness of those measures?
I can jump in first, but it's been really clear that these measures work. It's not perfect, but we want to save lives, and even some lives are better than no lives. So we will certainly take a rule that saves lives over a no rule. The menthol bans have largely showed that menthol smokers quit at a higher rate than they do now, and that they often are more successful at quitting. So I think it's pretty clear evidence that menthol bans are working.
Can I chime in here too, Laurent? There's the other thing we've learned from local or state menthol restrictions or the international restrictions is the industry responds by trying to get around the restriction. So we saw the introduction of so-called non-menthol products in California after the flavor restriction at the state level finally took effect. We've seen that in other jurisdictions. They are trying, they try to promote cross-border sales, things like that for jurisdictions that have restrictions next to those that don't. And there's a couple of important things to take from this. It does not mean we should do nothing. It means we should do more. That a federal, comprehensive, well-enforced prohibition on menthol cigarettes will save more lives and avoid some of this, the things that eat away at the effectiveness of the public health protection that Kelsey's referring to. It's imperfect. It could be better. And the FDA can do it. They have the authority to enact a federal prohibition, and they have the resources to effectively enforce it in partnership with state and local enforcement officers. So I think that this is a really, really persistent and pernicious industry. And we have to bring all of our resources to bear in responding to it. But, the fact that they fight back doesn't mean we do less. It means we need to do more.
And if I could also jump in, I'm Dr. Mark Mitchell with the National Medical Association. It's not just death that we're seeing. We're seeing high rates of disability. It affects all aspects of medicine. Smokers are more likely to have amputations. They're more likely to suffer all sorts of illnesses. Dr. Lawson can tell you about pregnant women and the effects on babies. And even if you look at the placenta of smokers, you can tell that the mother's a smoker because the placenta has damage around the edge of it, and it's much worse. So again, it's not just the death, it's the disability, it's the inability to live a long and healthy life. And those aren't in the calculations about the medical costs. Those are in addition to the medical cost, in addition to the cost to the industry that we're currently seeing.
Thanks. Chris, would you want to go back just to then clarify that you went through the specific dates and you answered the next steps in the legal process, but do you want to go clarify those one more time?
Sure. So we just filed our lawsuit earlier today at 12 noon Eastern. We submitted a proposed summons to the clerk of the court as well. Once we get a approved summons from the court, then we can serve that on the FDA and the other defendants in this case. Because the defendants are the United States, they would have 60 days to respond. And so I think the sort of past practice here has been that the United States is generally taking the full amount of time, the full 2 months. Obviously, we'll probably be reaching out to opposing counsel in the meantime, just to give them a heads up. But the United States generally has about 2 months to respond. They can either respond through a formal answer or a motion to dismiss. If there's an amended complaint, there may be a little bit of an extension of time, depending on how much time has elapsed. And then after that, there's an initial conference with the court, which is typically set up once the judge is assigned. At this point, we don't have an assigned judge, but we will be making a motion to have our new case administratively related to our earlier 2020 case before Magistrate Judge Candace Westmore. We believe that would save the parties and court resources and just sort of take a lot of efficiencies to bat there. With respect to a timeline of what it is that we're asking for, our complaint specifically says that we are asking for the promulgation of a final rule within a reasonable time. I think we've made the case in our complaint that the time is now, that certainly 90 days would be plenty of time. And that, if the Biden administration or FDA wanted to issue a rule next month, next week, that would be fine by us. And so, I think that really what we would love to see is the public health protected, and we would love to see action by FDA to help save public health lives. I think there was a question also about the cost estimate to the healthcare system. I'll just note, and other people can jump into that, in FDA's analysis back in 2022, when it issued this proposed final rule, they did their own sort of cost benefit analysis. You can find the analysis there. And they essentially found that although the cost to society might be in the ballpark of $100 million or something like that, that the benefits to society would be something in the ballpark of between $100 and $300 billion annually. And so benefits would greatly outweigh the cost of this proposed rule. I'm happy to let others jump in too.
So I just really like to reinforce some of the conversation today. While we know there's this economic number, right? 100 billion, 200 billion, 300 billion, I can't reinforce more. Life, and again, death, but also chronic disease. And then the issue, I think broadly for many physicians would be preventable deaths, right? People who are dying who don't have to die. And again, I can't emphasize more the impact on chronic disease. And that can be difficult to perhaps measure directly, right? But we know when we talk about this country, healthcare cost, we think about cardiovascular disease, we think about cancer. Even if you just took those three things, this issue is valid. We have evidence. We know it's dangerous. We know it's not healthy, and we know it's damaging. And I think that in itself is enough.
Mm-hmm. Plenty of evidence of why to act and act now. I think we've answered all of the questions that were posed through the various channels, but I'd like to give an opportunity to each of the panelists to just maybe give us the last words. Should we go in, Dr. Lawson, why don't you get started?
Sure. I really hope, I think, again, I'm so thankful that we have this collaboration. I know at the end of the day, for me, it's important that we do the right thing. We do the right thing and hold our administration to do the right thing. We ask that each of our agencies, the FDA and others, do the right thing. And so for me, this boils down to it. I understand, but again, this is profits over people. And we are just really asking on behalf of the National Medical Associations, people are put first. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lawson. Kelsey, why don't you go next?
I would just take the opportunity to say that menthol is a public health, a social justice, and a human rights issue, and the United States government needs to step up and protect our right to health.
Dr. Mitchell.
Yes, as Dr. Lawson said, the National Medical Association is looking to reduce and eliminate health disparities, and elimination of menthol cigarettes is one of the biggest steps that can be taken. Again, 85% of African Americans who smoke menthol cigarettes, and we know that if these are banned, that the quit rate would increase dramatically. And so that's why we want to see this ban go into effect. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mitchell. Joelle, I want you to go next.
Thanks, Laurent. I would say that one thing about this issue is it's, as Carol was saying, this is only the beginning. There's so much work to be done, and there are so many really complicated problems that drive health disparities and health harms in this country that researchers are trying to figure out how to fix. But in this case, we know what's causing this problem. We know exactly what to do. We have everything we need. The administration has everything they need to take an action that would save so many lives. And they must do it. They must rely on evidence and authority and act to protect public health. We have much bigger problems we also need to tackle. This should be an easy step for this White House to take, and they must do it now.
Thank you, Joelle. I'll have Christopher Leung, and then at the end, I will have the three AATCLC founders. Chris, you go next.
Sure. I don't have much to add beyond the wonderful words of our advocates here. It's a public health issue. Science has been clear for over a decade at least. I think we're pretty clear on the law here as well. FDA has an obligation to act now. It knows what it needs to do, and it could save lives today just by issuing this final rule.
Thank you, Chris. And now we'll have the three founders of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. Phil, why don't you start? Dr. Phil Gardner.
Mine will be short and sweet. And you've all heard it before. If there's one thing we did right, it was the day we started to fight. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hold on, hold on. I'll pass it to Val.
So many people know that I'm doctor. Very few people know that I'm a naturopathic doctor. I came to this fight because I saw tobacco as being the reason why my community was not going to be able to find health and wellness. I would like for us to move in that direction. It will benefit all, not just African Americans. If we're all living and thriving, it makes us a stronger nation. Biden, White House, FDA, do the right thing.
And I'd like to add in that I want to just remind everyone in this country that the tobacco industry, they are federally adjudicated racketeers under RICO, which is Racketeer Influence Corrupt Organizations, and that African Americans have borne the brunt of that illegal and pernicious and vicious activity. We are their victims. We are their victims, and so we rise up today. We're not tired. The industry thinks they're going to wear us out, but we have a whole army of folks that we're training all over this country. And that when we talk to Black people about menthol cigarettes, they get it because they have lived it. They have lived it. There's nothing more powerful than lived experience. And I want to really just reiterate, Dr. Lawson, Dr. Mitchell, it's not just the deaths, it's how we live so miserably, how our old age is affected. People cannot enjoy the last years of their lives because of all of these chronic conditions that we have that are directly related and induced by tobacco. So we are praying and we move forward as we pray, work and pray that the Biden administration will begin to protect us, and that the FDA will do the right thing and issue this rule, get this rule out so that we can really begin the process of healing and giving our community the resources that they need.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Carol. So exactly. So let's hope the government acts as quickly as possible and does the right thing to save the millions of lives this action will save. So thank you all for joining us today, and feel free to contact, you have the press contacts if you need more information. And you can contact also Megan Arendt at manningm@ash.org. Thank you very much for joining us today. Bye.